marketing experience is maybe the first experience that a developer will have, whether it's marketing from a public standpoint or, even, some internal description of the APIs that they use within their company. Yeah, I think that we will see more tools that kind of blur that line and allow people to allow someone to start to learn some of those tools. You don't have to go and get the computer science degree or spend years in an engineering organization to start to tinker. So I think there's a lot of movement happening there for sure. I am certain that there are enterprises who are attempting to build their own version of that or have built their own version of that kind of internal business user enabler.
Hello and welcome everyone to the API Resilience Podcast. Today we're really excited to have a guest, Adam DuVander from Portland, Oregon. His company is EveryDeveloper, and you can look into that at everydeveloper.com and find him on Twitter at Adam D, A-D-A-M-D. And we've had an interesting discussion about his business, and I know that it's going to give you some good ideas and good stories. So let's get started. Hi, Adam, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, great to be here.
So Adam, we know each other, like as we said earlier, from the API circuit, which is
a new thing of the last 10 years.
Yeah, exactly. So I know you as that really thoughtful, inspiring speaker that always comes with some really interesting bits of content that like your sessions I always try to attend, because sometimes I feel that in the API space you can get like a lot of either very technical or very vendor or like talks that are a little bit less interesting for me at least. And you always come with a little bit different angle, and I really like that. So I thought it would be really cool to have you on the cast.
Yeah.
It's awesome for me too, because I'm getting to meet all of Kristof's friends and people that he holds in high regard. So,
and it's great in a time like this where we can't connect we would have probably seen each other at a couple conferences in the last couple months, but at this time we're not able to. So it's good to have things like this to be able to connect.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Definitely. So I think you're in a really interesting space because you're skirting the edges of developer communication and business communication and like mixing the two up and and achieving real business value as a result from that, and helping companies with doing that, because that's something that's really hard. Can you maybe tell a little bit more about like what you're doing exactly and how you help companies?
Yeah, and the being really hard is how I've come into doing it. So I help great dev tool and API companies to reach more of the right developers, and we do that with content that educates and inspires those developers. And often is the case that marketing can really not resonate, just lands really poorly with developers, often can have the opposite effect with a developer audience that's maybe skeptical or thinks that what you're saying is hype. And so being able to find that authentic voice and be able to reach those devs and be able to help them explain how what you have can solve their problem, but doing that first by just trying to show that you understand the problem, which is often the spot where marketing can have a tough time.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, because it's a great place to start, because I've seen that quite often with development teams that I've worked with. And I think the reason that marketing sometimes falls flat with them is that developers are in the business of trying to listen to business people talk and cut away all of the BS, for a better term, to actually get down to what the actual problems are, not not whatever fancy language. We were joking yesterday about synergies. They don't want to hear the word synergies and things like that because it doesn't mean anything. They want to get down to what what it means brass tacks.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really interesting that you're helping solve that problem, because people have to, marketing is necessary, and people have to know that something is out there that's going to help them. And the marketing team wants to help do that. But being able to do that with an authentic voice that builds trust with the developers that's a really, really high bar. It's hard to do.
Yeah, well, I can tell you how I ended up here. And well, in one case, I am a developer in a past life. So I have that, at least remnants of that same sort of skepticism, right? But I was the first editor of Programmable Web, directory of APIs, and a news source for everything new in APIs. And I had to look through all of the marketing heavy press releases about some new API, and had to do exactly what those developers are trying to do, which is pick out the stuff that actually matters and figure out where it can actually fit into their life. So it was my job to be able to provide that clarity. And I realized these companies need, it should be their job to do that. It shouldn't be the editor of an API journal's job to do that. And so that's how I ended up first on the provider side, and now as a consultant to providers.
That gives you great street cred. I mean, you've probably seen it all.
And what is actually the root of this problem? Like, why is it that, because I don't think the problem is with marketing per se. I think it's this perception in marketing that you have, it feels like it's a default in marketing to treat your audience as just a dumb cattle that's just has to be manipulated with all kinds of way too expensive words. Just it's almost like gaslighting that's happening. It's like, where does that come from? How come that this is like the way that people think they should be doing it?
Well, I think that first of all, it's really hard to understand some of the underlying technical problems that a tool solves. And so often someone who doesn't have that technical background has to go to the features of it to be able to understand it. And any great marketer will tell you that you should be sharing benefits, not features. But because the benefits are harder to be able to get to, it ends up being about sharing the features. And so SendGrid was where I went right after Programmable Web, and people probably got tired of me saying share knowledge, not features, so much so that finally there's now a website, shareknowledgenotfeatures.com, where you can
awesome
where you can learn about how to do that. And so it came out of that experience and that kind of continued drumbeat. And so I have a lot of empathy for the folks that don't have the developer background to be able to understand it completely. And at the same time, they have some amazing marketing skills that I do not have. And so I try to be that partner that can help level them up to the spot where they can use that voice.
Yeah, I was going to say, Kristof, that any marketers who listen to that will take offense at what you said, and whenever they make it seem so easy, they're probably doing something really difficult because it works. And if you feel talked down to, then it's they've missed with you. But
well, it's like I bought these glasses 2 weeks ago, and as you can see, I'm not wearing them right now because I got sold onto this bifocal lenses that are they're called Zen lenses, which are supposed to make your life easier. But because of their bifocal, it actually makes your life worse. So it's this, It's just such a missed opportunity because there's so much value that we can be providing for our audiences. If we just, I think it's probably a matter of vulnerability, of being able to say, I really don't understand this. I need help. Like, why is this good? And so I'm not saying there's a lot of good marketers out there that are not doing this stuff, but I think the key thing is that if you're going to be targeting developers, watch out, because they can look under the hood. They know what's inside. They know if it's crappy code that you're packaging in a ribbon, and they'll find out, and they'll see that it's not good, or that you promise this is not holding true. If you say it's going to be 5 seconds to sign up and it takes weeks, they already know that you're fake. So be real and be honest, and then developers will appreciate that. I think is that also your experience?
And I think really, one thing to remember there is that the marketing experience is maybe the first experience that a developer will have, whether it's marketing from a public standpoint or even some internal description of the APIs that they use within their company. Like, there's some level of marketing to that, to how you describe that, how you expose that to them. That's really the first level. And then once they get in there, there's a lot more that to the developer experience. And that's going to be the case in a public API, in an internal situation, in a sort of partnership base. And that's really the spot there where it stops being marketing and it is this other blend that includes kind of product and technical writing and there's a lot more to that experience and that's really, you want that first experience to be congruent with the next experience, right? That's kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So we talk whenever we're talking with people about dev portals, we point out that you definitely are making a mistake if you only build your dev portal for developers. That business personas need to come there, even if they're technical or non-technical, it doesn't matter. You've got an audience there that you've got to speak to. And I tend to think of this as a bifurcation that has to be, you've got to have something there that will form the business user's journey through the dev portal, and then something else that forms the developer journey. But something that I'm hearing you say is that these are often not separate journeys, especially at the beginning, and trying to get that right is really important. Can you talk more about that? Did I get it right? And
yeah, I think you need to be able to explain what to expect from a developer tool or API in a way that connects to the real world. And so if we get to a lot of the work that I do, it is sort of that story right there. Here is this technical thing. Now here are the reasons why you would use it. And those reasons are going to be things that resonate with both developers and other business users of the portal. And they're going to want to understand that. And I saw this at Zapier. So previous to EveryDeveloper, I worked at Zapier, which connects thousands of APIs together. And I worked on the platform side, where someone who had an API would come and they want to connect to the Zapier platform. And we had a number of discussions and changes to the portal that I actually talked about in a DevRelCon talk about your dev portal's invisible audience. Mm-hmm. And it being that non-developer who may still be a technical person. And in that case, we realized that there were marketers, there were product managers, there were support people from all of these different SaaS tools who wanted to expose their tool on Zapier so that their users could achieve these goals of connecting to these thousands of apps. And in that talk, I go through where we had tried to launch a CLI, a very developer-focused tool that was based on user research that happened before I got there, but there were definitely people who wanted that really super powerful dev tool. But we learned over the course of a year or more that there was a much larger group that just needed a UI that allowed them to be able to take the technical bits. I mean, using an API is a technical process, no matter how you use it. And
Adam,
they need to be able to connect those.
The reason that you saw me smiling and shaking my head is I couldn't believe we got here, because this has been something that Kristof has been talking about, the democratization of APIs. And with some other guests, we've talked about, trying to address the needs not only of developers, but, this new emergence of no code and low code solutions. Yeah. And that's been a rich source for us. And I was going to bring it up later in the episode, because I wanted to say, okay, so we've talked about these two paths that you have to walk between the marketer and between the business persona and the developer. And what about all these non-developers who don't identify as developers? How do we attract them and give them the right experience? Because it's, they might have a different story. So how does it complicate things for you, or does it uncomplicate them?
I mean, in the case of that specific example, it was clear that the majority of those users were not going to download a CLI. That was a non-starter for them. They don't open the terminal app. But I think that I've seen this in API providers starting to add on tools on top of their foundation, so they maintain that developer audience. I mean, you see Twilio and Stripe doing this quite a bit, actually, with the tools that require less code but still have the ability to configure. And for Twilio, with their Studio, where you can kind of connect the tools together. So I think we see some dev-focused companies that are starting to ride that blurry line. I think that the underlying discussion of the problems that you're solving is not that different. It's just the application of the API that becomes different. So a developer is going to need less context around those technical details than another would need. But they're still going to all need that sort of, here is the problem and here's how you solve it.
One of my assumptions around this is that basically it's like a gradation scale of less and more constrained affordances. So you have like the hardcore API where you can do whatever you want. Mm-hmm. And then like the more pre-chewed it is, like the more you're hiding stuff behind the interface, and you're reducing the possibilities of failing and doing something wrong. But you're also reducing the optionality of the integration. It becomes more powerful. It's easier to do stuff for more people. At the same time, like some of the things that are a little bit more edge cases become harder. Is this also how you see this?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I hadn't quite put it down to those words, but yeah, I think it's definitely the case where, if you're just needing some very common use cases that, this happens to me. I used Twilio for just a little weekend project recently, and I was able to use more of the lesser code type of options. Didn't have to, find somewhere to host it, could kind of use their tools for that. Now, it was pretty simple. Send a text message, reply with a static message if someone sends a message kind of project. So it lent itself to that. Now, if I wanted to have it be more advanced, if I wanted to kind of pull the cover off and look at how it works, that would require more. And I happen to be capable of doing that, and not everyone is. So they might stay at the lesser code level. And I think I think that we will see more tools that kind of blur that line and allow people to allow someone to start to learn some of those tools. You don't have to go and get the computer science degree or spend years in an engineering organization to start to tinker.
It's for me it feels like we've got this new information infrastructure that is amplifying our ability to do things, both on sensing and on executing. Like the way I've referred to it in previous episodes, it's like your nervous system. You have nerves going to your muscles that are like helping you to do stuff, and then you have nerves that are subscribing to events and that are telling you when something is happening. And those capabilities need to become available for everybody. So that more and more people can take advantage of this newfound power that's out there. You shouldn't have to be a developer to be able to do that.
Yeah. And you mentioned events, and that's kind of one of the things. Definitely in my Zapier time, I experienced a lot of events being webhooks and other ways of having real-time data flow, which definitely was a big part of what Zapier wanted companies to do. But, since the earliest days of hearing about webhooks, it's never been adopted at the level that it should be. And I think probably needs to be, if what you're describing is to come to fruition. Like, if there's anything that technical people can do to enable the people who don't develop for their job to be able to use more of these tools, I think it is to provide them in an event structure, so that there's less that's required to spin up something that uses it. You don't have to monitor for changes yourself. You can set you can set up, Lambda or other sort of functions as a service to be able to consume and respond to these messages. And so then I think that there will be tooling built around making that easier as well. Yeah. That I think could enable a lot of people.
So I'm wondering if you see, do you expect technology companies en masse to start producing these low code, no code solutions, to Kristof's point, that have a lot of the affordances taken away that are built for majority use cases and things like that? Or do you think that the Zapiers and companies like that are going to bridge the gap? Because to me, the success of those companies like Zapier points out the need for these other solutions that companies aren't providing. I don't want you to feel put on the spot, but have you seen examples where companies are like, hey, wait, we should be doing this because someone else is doing something, wrapping us up in some other solution, and really eating,
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a couple of startups that are focused on enabling internal applications. And so that kind of begins to, they're still mostly developer focused, but it's, on the making some of the repetitive things easier. And then there are just a bunch of Zapier-like companies. And really, if you look at the two big ones being Zapier and IFT, they for a long time have been very fairly narrowly focused on specific audiences. So IFT is very focused on connected home, and that, they raised a lot of money, and that's kind of, banking on that sort of future that, I think a lot of us probably live in some way. The lights in this office can be controlled from my phone. So that you have that direction, which is a sort of consumer user really barely scratching the surface of what you would call code. Then you have Zapier, which is very business user focused, has been charging from almost day one to solve business problems. And all of these SaaS tools primarily are business tools that people are using. And it's really a set number of use cases. There are some advanced things you can do with code steps and webhooks in Zapier, but for the most part, they haven't gone to that superpower user. Like, even there's a large spectrum within the Zapier users, but even at the most advanced stage, it's not a lot of code. There are other tools that are trying to fill in that space. I hear people talk about Integromat being one that's for a lot more kind of developer use cases. Pipedream is one that's not even in the, I don't think consider themselves a Zapier-like company, but they do have connections to many APIs, and it's a lot more code focused. You make that connection and then you write some code to deal with it. And yeah, there are a bunch of others in that space. So I think there's a lot of movement happening there for sure. I am certain that there are enterprises who are attempting to build their own version of that, or have built their own version of that kind of internal business user enabler. Yeah, so I think that's definitely a direction that we're going, and that would be, you have that use case for public APIs, but there's probably even a maybe larger use case for some of the internal stuff and being able to expose that.
So what is the interface for that? So I like to think of dev portals as the interface of the interfaces. So like how do you expose those? Because it feels like there's two ways, or very broadly speaking, there's two ways to do this. One is the distributed way, where everybody has to like do their own thing. And there's a centralized way where you have a couple of platforms like Zapier and IFT that become kind of like the de facto place where you go and do certain kind of jobs. But there's probably, the truth is somewhere in the middle, like always.
Right, yep.
But how do you expose that? Like, I guess you could say, yeah, we're on Zapier on your website. It's like I've started thinking about this recently, that it feels, as we are adding more as we are broadening the audience, it feels like the dev portals become something else, or they become like an integration portal or something like that. And I've been wondering is this the direction that this is going? Like, we had one customer and they call it a business solution, which is interesting because they do more than, it's not just APIs they've got on their dev portal. They also got other things like widgets and QR codes and some interesting things. And they're not purely targeting developer audiences with that. They still put it on their dev portal, but they have like landing pages that are bringing you to the dev portal from somewhere else. How is this going to evolve, do you think? Like, are we going to make like the dev portal, is that going to be like your next website kind of thing? Or like or is this going to be something like, the Facebook company page? You're going to have like an integration portal company page where you have all your integration points for different use cases? Or is there going to be like a standard way of exposing those integration points for different audiences? How do you see that?
Yeah, well, I mean, the short answer, Kristof, is I don't know.
Sure.
But I think you're right that there needs to be some kind of interface, and I'm not sure that we've seen it now. You see kind of the standard workflow kind of list approach. There's the Yahoo pipes, dragging of things together, and I'm not convinced either of those is the way. And definitely for the developer audience, that kind of drag and drop, thing is a little bit of it gets a little scary. That becomes a turnoff for that audience. So if you're trying to enable something that could work for that blurry line, that becomes difficult for sure. Yeah, I'm not sure whether. I mean, it seems like the example you gave with all the different things in what is still called a dev portal feels a little bit like we have this thing called the dev portal, and it's the closest to what we have now, right? Yeah. So it does seem like there's it's begging for something that's a little more new that might have pieces of what is in a dev portal.
Yeah.
But, might also have, that has these that makes more sense for these other things. But that's very, you're thinking like a futurist now.
Oh, this is
that's why I love to talk to Kristof. He's got all these great ideas.
I think the tricky thing is, how do you help these different audiences that will come to this portal to self-select what kind of solution they need? And there's some of this, some of this is around technical solutions and your capabilities. Some of it is around problem spaces and solutions that are available for different problem spaces. But it's, I don't think that there's,
a difficult problem in labeling, I think also. Mm-hmm. So I think if you go all the way to the what the super dev wants, it is a turnoff to the other end of the spectrum, yes, and vice versa.
Yes.
And if you have sort of this landing page, going back to hey.net with the need hey, have hey. I don't know if you remember that user experience example. So you have one of those says developer. The question is, what does the other one say? And I think that's the difficult part, because people tend not to identify by what they're not. So non-developer. I mean, I guess if I'm not a developer, I click that, but I definitely don't feel great about that. Yeah.
No, I think it's more like solutions. Just start developing and solutions. It's like, well, I'm not going to be developing, so let's check out the solutions.
Yeah.
But then you still need to sub-segment there, because you're going to have different types of interfaces also there. I think one of the eye-openers for me was that sometimes the technical solution also dictates the type of audience that you're going to attract with it, which is really interesting. So it's, but it feels almost like just...
What's an example of that?
Like the widget, for example. Like a developer probably will not use a widget. Like someone who's like really into stuff, unless they're really time constrained. But like a website builder, or like a business owner who's built their own websites, they can only use a widget. That's all they can use.
So I want to challenge that a little bit, because in the example that Adam gave earlier about his weekend project, which made me feel bad because I mowed the grass and worked on taxes, and he's doing something really cool. But also the example that you just gave, I think for me, it really comes down to one dimension is definitely technical skill. But that's probably, to think about it from a single dimension, is probably the wrong way. It's probably also, how core is this to what you're doing, and what kind of dependency does it create for you? So if I'm thinking of cases where, as a developer, there's something on the edge that we need to do, we don't want to do, there's a widget for that, and they grab the widget, and they're super technical, but they're okay to use the widget because it fits their needs so well. And developers will tell you over and over, we became developers because we're lazy and we don't like to do things twice, which they'll also tell you that it's not until I wrote the same code for the third time that it was really good. But it's I think that probably need to think about this from a multidimensional way, and I'm wondering what all those dimensions might be. But we've got two now, so there's level of technical skill, and then there's how core, or how dependent is your solution on your success.
There's also like, what kind of integration does this have to have with your application? Because you might want to have a very light integration where it's just triggering the next step and you're doing something else. Or you might want to have like a very deep integration where information actually gets transferred. And both could be features. It might look like it's always better to have more data, but sometimes you want less data, which is interesting.
One thing that we talked about in the pre-recording as we were setting up was the need to establish trust and find that authentic message, and how working that boundary between selling your program and not turning off your developer really hinges on the ability to find that authenticity. And I think during the recording, I think Adam, you said that the first messaging and what the developer then finds, they have to be congruent. And so I kind of want to get back to that idea, because in this case, I think that is really difficult, A, and B is, maybe it's difficult because, we're talking about broadening kind of the tent to include people who wouldn't identify as developers who are going to be doing something. But, in those other dimensions that we were just talking about, that you just mentioned, Kristof, there's, how deeply integrated you are, and how averse to things operating in a way that is magic versus knowing. Some people will copy code, and if it works, they're happy with it. And other people, they would never do that because they have to know why it works. And if something looks like magic, they don't want it. But if you're, working on a weekend on a project, doing something instead of taxes and mowing, you might be just fine with some magic. So I don't think I answered the question. I'm not sure I formed the question.
I think for a developer, it comes down to trade-offs, and maybe that's the case across the board. But developers tend to have more knowledge of how they can eliminate some of those trade-offs. And it actually reminds me of a connected device kind of story from my time at SendGrid. And it was totally not related to SendGrid work itself. There was a Boulder holiday party where all of the startups would create their own Christmas tree and could decorate it however they wanted. And so the evangelism team, which I worked a lot with, was intent on being able to create a Christmas tree that you could correspond with over email. And they had an afternoon to do it. Like bright developer types, they should be able to do this. I said, I realize now this is a story that makes me look like a genius, but that's okay. I said, why not go buy a Wemo plug, right? Like, so it's already set up to be able to receive sort of webhooks and things that, you can connect it with IFT. But what they wanted, like to them, what they saw there were trade-offs they would in how they could customize it that they weren't willing to go with. And so for them, the project became, let's go and solder some things. We've got, right, there was a whole, and I believe I went and took a nap. And the Christmas tree could not be communicated with over email because, I mean, it became a bigger project than could be done in that afternoon. Now, I don't know, does that make me look like a genius, or does that, make me look like I was not willing or able to see that larger vision and the trade-offs that they would have to make to be able to achieve the outcome, and I think that we see those decisions, and whether they are the right decisions or not for a developer to make is really not for the three of us to determine, right? We don't have all of the context of everything going on within their company that makes a widget not be the right solution, that makes something deeper be a requirement.
I think that the meta skill, like I'm not a developer myself, right? But I think that the meta skill of being a good developer, I think, is about knowing what level of constraints you should be making and taking. And I think it's this going beyond seeing complexity as a problem, but seeing complexity as something that's just there, or that is actually an opportunity to build something that's resilient. And going beyond seeing constraints as limitations, but seeing them as power tools that allow you to perform work. And I think that the tricky thing is that too often we look at constraints and we see something that's holding us back. But if you really think about it, like the most creative we are when we have a lot of constraints. Like in French, they have this word bricolage, which is basically like throwing a bunch of stuff together, and or like taking whatever you have and somehow make it work. It's like MacGyvering. And I think this is probably the future, is understanding constraints, understanding complexity, and dealing with it appropriately, not by wishing it away, because you can't make complexity go away. It's always there. You can hide it, and then maybe that's useful. Maybe that's and I think this is what APIs do, is like hide complexity behind an interface that takes a bunch of decisions so that you can't go wrong. But it's but I think this is the key skill, is like playing with that, not just saying like I want no complexity, I want no constraints, or I want full freedom and I want something simple, but like knowing when to pick what and but how do you communicate that?
And I think that becomes, so I mean, a lot of what we've been talking about is this developer and citizen developer, or whatever name we want to call to the along that spectrum. But even within developers, this is an issue. And I've talked about kind of the build versus buy question that dev tool companies have to answer for their audience. If we're talking about a public API that's more infrastructure, like a Twilio or a Stripe, they have to explain that. And the natural developer tendency is to say, I can build that. And so some of them are going to go off and make that decision based on trade-offs or based on, some desire to really solve that problem themselves. And others will see that they have really interesting problems that they can solve on their own, and that some of the problems solved by the dev tools are ones that they can allow someone else to solve, and they could probably do a better job than they do.
We see
and
this.
I see that, across that whole spectrum that even includes some low code, no code solutions.
We see that in the dev portal world, where developers very often are like, oh, I can build this documentation site. It's easy. Like, it's just some HTML and I can make this nice little React app. And they're like, okay, but you do realize that there's a whole CMS world out there with people that have been doing this for decades. And you're going to just replicate all of that. Okay. So I think this is something we bump into a lot. Yeah.
I two things. We work in Drupal, and a common story that I've heard people who've been in Drupal for a long time is that they came to Drupal after they wrote their own CMS and PHP with MySQL, and they said whenever they were done, it was so much work, and they were like, "There's a better way." And they went to adopt. And so the other piece of this that I want to pull on is I've had this side quest in my career as a development manager to try to identify the different dimensions that developers work on. And I call them technical values. And I found that you get a team of really bright people together, and if they don't have these magic compatible technical values that I haven't been able to fully articulate, the team doesn't click and they cannot move very well. And sometimes there's unnecessary conflict. And for an organization to be able to put out these different kinds of solutions, it's going to feel bad to some of those developers because it's going to rub their technical values the wrong way. And they may not even want to work on that project that the company desperately needs or could benefit from, and could really be a springboard for their adoption. And then I'm wondering about, on the other side, can a company lose cred with developers because some of these solutions violate these technical values that the developer holds? And that's where something like Zapier is, will continue to be, part of the portfolio, because there are some things that, for human reasons can't be done by the company.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
One thing that we said that we wanted to get to, one of the goals of this podcast is to help people during the coronavirus crisis and the business downturn that it's brought about, to help them find ways to continue to build value and transition and be creative, using this challenging time as one of those constraints that Kristof has talked about, to do really great stuff. And we really believe in digital transformation. And I just want to ask you, is there something that you are seeing or something that you're trying to do, that's interesting with regards to the crazy time that we live in?
Yeah. I mean, I think first of all, in general, technology has not been hit as hard as some other areas. And that's something that I remind myself of and remember to have a little bit of gratitude. And likely someone, unless they're in an industry that directly serves, travel or others that kind of that were hit hard, they're probably in a better spot. But I think some of the hardest hit could, in this new normal that is emerging, and there's I would say now there is a new normal that's ready to be served, and that even some of the hardest hit could have opportunities. If you look at Square, if you'd asked me on April 1st how I thought Square was going to handle having millions of customers who just are not taking orders anymore, I would have said, wow, that's really, really bad. And I haven't looked to see how they're weathering that, but I do know that they responded with this kind of online cart setup for millions of customers that had no concept of an online presence beyond perhaps a website, that you're then able to go and order online, and to be able to turn that around in a short amount of time, to be able to enable those businesses to weather this, is, to me, a great story. And as I think about OpenTable, which was one of the first ones we heard about, where, you have reservations going to nearly zero overnight, like their entire business. I could see possibilities now that we're starting to open up here in Portland, and it's opening up in a very slow, methodical manner. And you have the coffee shop that I used to go to every single day and spend several hours there. They now have 6 tables. I mean, that's the maximum they can do. So now a coffee shop that had no concept of reserving anything might actually become in a spot where I mean, there could be millions and millions of more companies that, of restaurants, of cafes that need to have reservations that had no need for an OpenTable before. So those are just 2 examples on like super hard hit areas. But if you think about your own industry, I mean, I think that there are those opportunities in many, many areas. And, we have seen, I mean, you've seen Zoom become a household name overnight. Didn't expect my entire family to know. I mean, I've been using it for years, but suddenly they're using it as a verb. And businesses built on providing additional services on top of Zoom. And I think from an API perspective, this one's really interesting because it's a test for Zoom to see if they're really a real platform. I mean, I saw one of ways of reorganizing the actual video, like where the videos are located, a lot of stuff on kind of note-taking, the sorts of things that if you're someone at Zoom, you might say, oh, that was on our roadmap, or that could be on our roadmap. But are they in a spot where they're going to allow this platform to really build to its fullest success? And from my perspective, I think that is to allow these companies to build these things, and to know that, that there's in combining forces, there will be greater things built. And I think we can do that across the industries with APIs.
Very wise words. I think you also shared a blog post that you did to help people develop content, because I think this is the other thing that I've seen some people do is like, well, I don't know what the autumn will bring. I'm very hopeful about the vaccine, but I think it's going to take a while. More lockdowns might follow. Yeah. And what I've seen some people do is then amp up their marketing. And don't get me wrong, with the earlier comments, I strongly believe in the value of marketing. You had some content out there that could help people with their developer marketing. Could you maybe give a short pitch about that?
Yeah. So, and that's, of the things I've seen. So those examples I just gave are kind of forward looking. What I've seen people doing in this kind of quarantine time is there's definitely been kind of hunkering down and planning and being more strategic. And a couple of the places where I have seen that have been in, so this idea of signature content is what you're referencing, and the developer content mind trick, which is the post on HeavyBit that I wrote about being able to describe exactly how a developer would build the dev tool or API that you provide, and to really going back to that sharing knowledge. You're sharing all of your knowledge about this with the hope at the end of that they say either that's really hard, let me have you do it for us, or you are really smart about this, so let me have you do it for us. Or that third one, which is, you've shown it all to me and you've helped me a lot. I'm convinced I can build it, so I'm going to go off and build it. And that person likely would not have been a buyer in one of those first two circumstances anyway. And at the same time, you have still shown yourself as an expert in whatever that topic is to that third person, who, when someone comes to them and says, hey, you built this, this flagging system, to use the Launch Darkly example, which is in that post, how can I do that? They would say, oh yeah, well, I did build that for, these trade-off reasons that I have as a developer, but you should probably just use Launch Darkly. And so then they actually can still become an advocate of what you do, even though they didn't become a buyer. So yeah, I believe strongly in sharing knowledge and finding those core pieces where you can do that through signature content and really pull those right developers in, and then you can help them.
It's always a bit of a vulnerable thing, though, to share your secret sauce, and it's like we got approached about a workshop about developer experience, and then the comment was like, yeah, you share so much stuff. This is so awesome that you're just putting it all out there. And sometimes we're like between the founders, sometimes we're like, we're really, if anybody wants to copy us, like we basically wrote it all down for them. Mm-hmm. And what's your take on that? Like, I have my answer, but I'm curious to hear your answer to it.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a line that you would walk there. Unless you're an open source company, you're not going to completely give all the code to everything that you've done to solve something. So that's a line, right? You're telling them how to approach it, maybe how to architect it, but not how to build everything. And, I think that that sort of piece would be too long if absolutely every bit of detail and every measurement of that secret sauce were in it. But the idea is to give beyond a taste, right? To give a full serving of what
of the complexity.
Yeah. And recognize that there has to be a little bit of faith in it being more positive outcomes than the negative outcome when someone goes and built it themselves.
I think that this has been a great conversation, and I realize we're running up to a hard stop that you have, but I just want to amplify something that you said earlier that resonates with me. And that's the idea that some of the resilience that we're talking about and some of the strength that we're talking about comes not from what a company does within, but rather the relationships that they're building. And I know, at Pronovix, we, value sharing and contributing to the community very strongly. And we feel very supported by, the work that we've done. And there have been times when it's been taken advantage of, and, there are givers and takers, and you're going to have plenty of people who are only takers. But, I think that in this crisis time that we're in, and the conversation that we've had about these developer journeys and helping people out, it's really important for people to look at this as an opportunity for them to create some of those relationships, those business relationships, the partnering relationships that an API program can help facilitate. And, some of the examples that you gave were really great examples of companies doing innovative things to take, not from a war profiteering, take on the coronavirus, but responding to the need and seizing the opportunity. And I think that's really encouraging. And you've got a very positive outlook that I am personally feel very glad that we were able to have this conversation with you.
Excellent. It's been great to be part of it. Great to reconnect with you both.
Likewise. Here's to meeting soon again.
Yeah.
I'm missing Portland, that's for sure.
So thanks again. And thanks to our audience for listening to this. Again, if you want to check out more about Adam and the work that he's doing, you can go to EveryDeveloper.com and look him up on Twitter at Adam D, ADAMD. And thanks for listening. Thank you for listening to the API Resilience Podcast. Make sure to follow us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, or Apple Podcasts for our latest episodes. If you want to share your comments with us, you can email us at podcasts@pronovix.com. And until next time, be well.